Hey everybody, this is Dylan. Today I am attempting my first freeze-dried recipe, all from individually freeze-dried ingredients, sweet potato, peas. So let me give you a little background. A freeze dryer, first of all, you can watch some of my other videos. I've also talked about this in the Well Your World Facebook group. Please join us. But a freeze dryer is nothing like a dehydrator. A dehydrator is a nice, cute little countertop unit where you put fruit, for example, and you can dehydrate it using heat and moving air to evaporate off some of the moisture, and you're left with either like a chewy piece of fruit that still has some moisture in it, or like with a banana chip, a really hard, crunchy piece of banana. But by no means does the finished dehydrated piece of fruit look anything like it did when it went into the dehydrator. The cool thing about the freeze dryer, and this is not just a cute countertop unit, it's a pretty expensive, large, noisy unit. I recommend it to anyone as scientifically nuts as I am, but I accept the fact that most people are not going to invest in something like this. The reason I got the freeze dryer was to make my own backpacking food. But hold on, let me tell you a little bit more about the freeze dryer. So what happens with the freeze dryer is, say, the food coming out looks almost exactly the same as the food going in. These are sweet potatoes that I cubed up. I blanched them to cook them through. They are cooked. I put them into the freeze dryer, pulled out all of the liquid using a freeze process and a vacuum process, and I'm left with really, really lightweight, like way lighter weight than a dehydrator could even accomplish, but it doesn't matter because the food coming out of the dehydrator is just not the same anyway. But I'm left with something that if I add water back to this, it's gonna be pretty similar in texture to the cooked sweet potato that went into the freeze dryer. So that is kind of the difference in what happens. It's way, way lighter, and it maintains the food in like a stasis where it's just frozen in time. Cryogenically frozen, but it's not actually frozen anymore because there's no liquid in it. Okay, let's move on. So I got the freeze dryer to try to make my own backpacking food because, as you know, when you go to the store and you buy the backpacking food in the cute branded Mylar bags, it's full of salt, oil, sugar, animal products, and I just feel gross after I eat them. And when I'm backpacking, I want to feel good the whole time because backpacking is amazing and fantastic. So I wanted to make my own because the stuff you buy in the stores is terrible. So I need to find an efficient way of accomplishing that, a good recipe. Here's what I was doing initially, is I was cooking a whole entire recipe on the stove, and then I was just pouring that recipe into the freeze dryer and freeze drying it like that. But I don't think that is the most efficient way to do it because you have so much liquid going into the freeze dryer in addition to the cooked food. So I've hypothesized that if I could freeze dry individual ingredients that are cooked, I could get way more in a freeze dryer load, and that matters because the freeze dryer uses a lot of energy and it takes like 2 days for one load to complete. So if I can be more efficient, I can produce more product and maybe even enough to sell to you on the internet if you wanted to use it for your backpacking food or for your regular food on those days when you just don't have time to cook. If I can make a meal where you just pour it out of that bag into the pot, add some boiling water, let it sit for a few minutes, and then you have a whole proper fresh tasting meal, then you could use it just for your day-to-day too on those busy days or whatever it is. So I think my hypothesis is sound. I can see here that all of these individual ingredients I think they're gonna rehydrate really well and make a delicious recipe. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm taking Kathy Fisher's Khichadi recipe, which is one of my favorites. So I know exactly what this one tastes like fresh, burned into my brain because I've had it hundreds of times. I'm gonna put a link to her book. Here it is, Straight Up Food. And I'll put a link directly to the recipe on her blog too, in case you wanna follow visually along with what I'm doing. But it's a great book, you should buy it. Anyway, I'm going to take all of the ingredients pre-cooked. I'm going to take all of the spices that I've got over here, and I'm going to add them together and add water, and we're going to see how close to the real recipe that it actually is. I don't expect to get it perfect on my first try, but anyway, let us begin. I'll often make this recipe when I'm just cooking it for dinner. I will double up Kathy's spices because I like a lot of different spices. So I'm gonna try it first with the regular amount of spices, and then I have another ramekin here with a whole other batch of spices, and I'll see which version I like better. I'm gonna make a half batch because I don't wanna waste so much food if I do this wrong on a whole batch. So I've got a half batch of spices and another half batch of spices in case I decide I wanna double it up. And all these spices are, it's a mix of cumin, coriander, crushed red pepper flakes, turmeric, cardamom, cloves, ginger, garlic. Those are all the spices that I've got here, and I've literally just taken the amounts from the recipe itself. Okay, now for the freeze-dried ingredients, I had to get a little bit more scientific on this. So what I did was I took, say, for potatoes, let's do the potatoes. I took a 10-pound bag of potatoes and I freeze-dried it. It yielded at least a couple of bags like this. But now I know that if her recipe calls for a pound of potatoes, I know the after weight, so I measured all of the weight of all the food that came out of the freeze dryer load of potatoes, and I can divide that by 10 to figure out exactly how many grams of freeze-dried cooked potatoes will equal 1 pound that she had initially called for in her recipe. So that is how I figured out we've got brown rice, freeze-dried. You've seen me do that in another video. We've got red lentils, which is practically like a powder, because you know how when you cook red lentils, it just becomes a mush? Well, when you freeze dry that mush, it pretty much just becomes like a powder, which is really gonna add flavor, but also it's gonna give us a nice thick stewy consistency in our recipe, which is probably why she chose red lentils in the recipe to begin with. The white potato, the sweet potato, what I did with the celery, oh my goodness, this is just like weightless. What I did with the celery is I chopped it up normal, I sauteed it, I cooked it through, and then I freeze dried it. Same with the onions, these are sauteed onions. I browned them quite a bit because I like that kind of brown flavor that you get when you're cooking the onions. And then peas, I literally just took frozen bags of peas, which are already blanched before they've been frozen, and I freeze-dried them just as is. I debated whether I should re-blanch them first, but it didn't make much sense to me why I would do that. So I think this is gonna work. We'll see what the consistency is like. So those are all the whole ingredients. The only ingredient that I left out was she calls for chopped fresh greens, which if you're doing this at home, you could always just add to the pot at the end. But freeze-drying greens, they're really, really fragile, and they almost just become powder if you're not careful, because they just break up to little bits if you freeze dry them. So I decided to leave that ingredient out for now, and we will experiment with that in the future. So let's go ahead and measure out. I've already done the math to figure out that I need like 70 grams of the brown rice to equal what a half batch of her recipe. I've got all my numbers written down here on the back of this envelope. So let's do it. I'm just gonna use my trusty kitchen scale to figure out all of my measurements. Super simple, and I'll just keep tearing the scale over and over as I add items to my bowl here. Okay, the first ingredient is brown rice. And all I did with the brown rice is I just cooked a big batch of rice and then I put it into the freeze dryer. Simple as that. And I know that I'm shooting for like 70 grams. Cool. Now the red lentils. The onion. I'll be able to reseal all of these bags. Potato. Sweet potato. Celery. And now the peas. Cool, so that is all of the dry ingredients there. That's a half batch of khichadi. And now I am just going to add this to my pot. And I'm gonna add my half batch of the spices. And now I don't know how much water to add, because obviously I can't just add the amount of water her recipe calls for, because that doesn't account for all of the water that was sucked out of all of the fresh food. So I am going to just experiment and take note of how much water I'm adding, and then we'll go from there. Okay, all I'm gonna do is add a couple cups of water at a time. There's 2, 4, let's see what happens there. I'm gonna maintain just a little bit of heat. Okay, I'm gonna close the lid and let this sit, and we'll see how much more water I need to add here in a few minutes. I'm just gonna reseal all my bags. I'm not gonna bother using the vacuum sealer that pulled all the air out before, since I'm assuming I'm only gonna have these sealed for a short time. So everything will keep really well just with the regular seal here. All it does is apply a thin strip of heat and it melts the bag together. It's called an impulse sealer. It's looking really nice, but I'm gonna go ahead and add another cup of water. Let's just start with 1 cup again. That's a total of 5 cups so far. Just give it a stir. That seems a little too soupy. That might have been too much, but we'll see how much it absorbs here. Okay, we are looking nice. Yeah, it absorbed a lot of that water. I haven't been keeping track of the time. It's been at least 20 minutes or more. And you could add a little more water to this, but I don't think I'll bother. Let's have a taste. That looks good. Oh my goodness. There's no way I got this perfect on the first try. It is so good. I cannot believe this. Even the spices are a really balanced amount. I don't think I would add more spices. I think this is what most people will really like. Wow. The texture is really good. Everything, it just tastes so fresh. I cannot believe how awesome freeze drying is. Everything, even the peas are like perfect. Insane. That is the best backpacking food I have ever eaten. All I would do now, this is a bag of freeze-dried khichadi that I made doing the other version, the build it all into a recipe like that, and then freeze dry it now. Like if I were to take a fresh pot of khichadi and freeze dry it, that's what I put in here. Again, it was like way less efficient because you have so much more water in it than if you just did the individual ingredients. But all this is a Mylar bag, and then I've got these oxygen absorbers, those little packets that you pull out before you put the water in. That's all that these are, and they just, this bag will taste as good 25 years from now as it does right now. So this is long-term storageable food. That's pretty awesome. And then here's a version of freeze-dried apples that I made where I used my vacuum sealer to suck out all the air from this bag. This is nice because it will take up less space in your pack if you're using it for backpacking food. So that's really cool. So I could have sucked the air out of the khichadi too, and it would have taken up less space because you've got some air in here, and the more air you've got, the less stuff you're gonna be able to fit in your pack before you start to run out of space. So I could do a backpacking version where I suck the air out, or if you're buying it just for home use, you don't need to suck the air out, obviously. But that just gives you a little sense of the different ways that you can do it. But literally, all you do is throw the dry ingredients in, throw in one of these, and then seal it with this impact sealer, the impulse sealer, and you're done. Really, really cool. I have no reason not to try to get some of this into your hands so you can tell me if you like it and if we're on to something, if it's a convenient thing for when you're in a bind or what. But I think there is something there. So we should play with it a little more. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you wanna get some of this and try it out or what. That is all for now. Join us to talk about it in the Well Your World Facebook group. Please like the video if you want to see some more of this, and I'll see you on the next video later.